I saw the first 3 episodes. It's wild.
Make you feel normal, doesn't it?
I'm trying to tell my aunt about it. She goes, Americans are the craziest damn people. I'm like, yeah, Habibi, you're right.
We are streaming live on the interwebs.
Beautiful.
All right.
Beautiful. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the UGASports Live podcast. My name is Roddy DeBulsi. I'm joined by Jake Roos and Dane Young, who's running this show now that we're not at Classic City Eats. Classic City Eats is currently closed right now. They're doing a ton of charity work, but that's where we normally be. But while we are all social distancing, we're all doing it from our offices. Dane's doing it from the stadium, apparently, if you check out his view there.
And of course, beautiful sky while it's raining at my house.
And how do we get that giant UGASports banner hanging above the stadium? That's fantastic.
That's permanent now. That's going to be.
I do not want to know what that cost us. So that's fantastic. And of course, Jake is repping for a sub company, trying to work out a little deal there.
Dublin's finest, baby. Shout out Dublin, Georgia. Now we go to Brian. I go to Brian's once a year. I've gone every year for like the past 5 years when we go to Georgia, Florida. I make a point to go through Dublin just to go to Brian's subs, and it's awesome. I know they don't pay us. I wish they would. I'll accept sub credit.
I know you're just trying to get that free sub. Hey, you remember on the podcast I wore your T-shirt?
Hey, that place is legendary in Dublin, man.
I know.
Anyway, big shout out to Classic City Eats. I'm sorry we can't be there. We'd love to be there right now. I mean, I'm jonesing for that great fried chicken they have, that mojo pork. I'd kill for that right now. But a lot of our other sponsors are up and running. Of course, Athens Ford still selling trucks. Aaron Overhead Doors still taking care of our customers, taking care of any UGA fan at 10% off. We had Your Pie earlier in the week. All the Your Pies are doing a takeout so that you can swing by and pick up the Your Pie pizzas. And of course, it's very easy to order online. You still customize it just like you would if you walked into the store. And of course, Academic Brewing Company, I want to give them a special shout out because they're doing a ton of work for the local Athens community. They're feeding people on the front lines. They're feeding kids that need meals, because the schools are shut down. So the friends that over at Academic Brewing Company doing a great job. And you can actually drive up and they'll do curbside, but you can also buy beer too. So swing out to our friends at Academic Brewing Company, take care of them. Of course, we're on the 365 Game Day and 11 Live Facebook pages. If you would give them a like, we're sharing this YouTube onto those Facebook pages. And of course, when we do YouTube only and we put it on Facebook and YouTube don't seem to get along. So we need your help in sharing this video across Facebook to let everybody know what's going on. Guys, I want to jump right into it. They say, well, nothing's going on. That's not true. We had Kirby Smart press conference today. He had it was actually a secret conference call. They sent out a note to just the beat media because they didn't want a million people joining in on it and saying, hey, you can send in your questions to Kirby. We'll delete all the duplicate ones and then we'll ask Kirby smart questions. And so our Anthony Bassett was on there.
Duplicates.
Yeah. Duplicates, anyone we don't want to ask. No, that's not because to Kirby Smart's credit, when we first saw that, it was like, hey, here's send your questions in and then we'll, sports information, Claude Felton will ask Kirby the questions. And that always makes you nervous as a journalist because you're like, wait a minute, why are you being the gatekeeper? Why can't I ask what the hell I want to ask? And to be fair, that's not Claude Felton's bag. I mean, Claude's always been about getting us answers. And Kirby at the end of it said, okay, that we've gone through all the pre-submitted questions. I got 5 or 6 minutes, fire away. So to Kirby Smart's credit, he did open it up to
questions about Tiger King.
Yeah, he got questions about Tiger King, of course. I got questions about Tiger King too, baby. So he, he opened it up, and he basically was asked a lot of stuff about what's going on. So we do have that to talk about today. So I thought, to me, I don't want to say the most interesting thing, but you're trying to deal with all the issues of them not having the students there. And I did not, because I don't say we lived it, but we saw it happen in real time. We did not realize the disadvantage Georgia was at in a lot of this because, February was closed off for recruiting. can't have anybody on campus. But then the 2 weekends that were open, if you will, where they could have kids on campus was the before and after Georgia spring break, the weekend before, the weekend after. Well, of course, all this kind of went down while Georgia was on spring break. So there were a lot of teams that were able to recruit those 2 weekends. They had guys come in, and Georgia was planning, hey, the weekend after spring break, huge recruiting weekend. I think it was March 21st or something when you're supposed to get all those 5-stars in. And you were thinking at the time, there's plenty of time. And then we're going to go right into spring practice. And it'll be, each weekend, each practice, each day, there'll be some kids there. So, but Kirby's like, look, a lot of schools had 2 weekends to host recruits. We didn't. I'm like, okay, well, that kind of sucks, but you're a strong recruiter. I don't know, you'll get around it. But he also pointed out, he didn't point out name the school specifically, but I remember Georgia Tech. A lot of the schools actually had a week or two of spring practice. So he kept pointing out that, well, like February, all the schools couldn't host recruits on campus, quiet period, dead period. But there are the banning, or not banning, but saying, look, no spring practices, that it was unfair. Now, he didn't say it's unfair, but he just pointed out that Georgia has actually, kind of got a little bit behind the 8 ball. And he also pointed out a lot of teams, you think that if no one can have spring practice, then it affects all teams equally. And he says that's not true, because if you have teams with a lot of experience, they can handle this a lot better. He's replacing offensive coordinator, special teams coach,
quarterback, 2 tackles,
a ton of offensive linemen. So, and Donald always makes the point, Jim Donald, former head coach, about how many of Georgia's defensive players have a ton of experience. But there's a lot of offensive parts that have to be replaced. And I just think that everyone wants to say, oh, I have it worse than anybody else. And Kirby was not doing that at all. He was just pointing out the facts that, and I didn't really see it from his standpoint until he did the press conference. Georgia kind of got screwed in all this. Am I wrong?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that there's certainly some of that to be said, but simultaneously, I mean, obviously it's completely out of their hands. And I would say too, I mean, you'll know this better than I would. I mean, they're the ones who determine that schedule, right? I mean, they're the ones who say this is when we want to start it. So you can bet your ass that March 1st next year, they're going to be firing this thing up, man, because they're going to take no chances on anybody getting a leg up. Whenever they can open that window, you know that they're going to get started next year.
I think it's kind of a spectrum, right? Where, are there some things about this that are going to be difficult for Georgia, whether it's replacing the quarterback or the 2 tackles? Not every team in the country has to deal with that. But like we said last week, Lane Kiffin, Mike Leach, Eli Drinkwitz, it's way worse for those cats that are going in there that barely even know they're players at this point and trying to create that relationship digitally. That's just going to be a really tough road to go down at that point, especially, depending on if the season starts at the same time, if they're trying to compress a lot into the same amount of time. What I do think you might see is that first spring practice kind of going into a sophomore season for a player can be so critical because they kind of have their feet under them. So I look at a guy like George Pickens, and this should be the time that he is emerging as a 100% team leader, playmaker guy. And you just hope that this time away doesn't kind of affect that track that he might be on.
Well, and two points on that as well. You mentioned this idea of, trying to implement all these new things. I think Todd Monken, look, the guy is an offensive whiz. He comes from the NFL. He's run some great offenses before at Southern Miss. I'm not too worried about his ability to work on a shortened schedule, to look at the talent he's got and say, all right, here's how we make this work based on what we've got. We're not going to try to reinvent the wheel, but let's go in and do what we can. I think where you're really missing out in the spring practices is the chemistry between the players. And taking the new guys in and trying to get them, comfortable around each other and try to get some of that continuity on the offensive line that we've talked about. Getting Jamie Newman throwing to these guys and Jamie Newman learning their tendencies. Where are they going to be on the field? Getting these guys to figure out where Newman's going with the ball. I think that that's really what you're missing out more so on than the coaching aspect of it. Just because I think, like I said, those guys are smart enough to work on an abridged timetable and really make things fit with the talent they've got.
There are some positions though, like tight end, where it's really not going to matter because they weren't going to have tight ends in spring anyway that were healthy hardly. I mean, that position was so ravaged, and you're not looking at Trey McKitty coming in or Darnell Washington until the summer at the earliest.
Sure. No, absolutely.
Yeah, I think Kirby was asked about, leading into this, who were some of the guys that were really kind of standing out to you in the off-season workouts. And he said, look, I don't want to signal anybody out, but he did mention those sophomores and juniors who are getting their, I don't want to say their first shot, but, who are getting that shot because some of the upperclassmen moved on. Some of the seniors have moved on. Some of the juniors have moved up and are now seniors. So if you were a freshman last year, this is, to your point, your sophomore season. Granted, I mean, you're still a freshman. You're still on your second or third semester at UGA, but you're kind of classified. You got one football season behind you. All the seniors are gone. Guys are moving around, and now you've moved up one or two spots in the rotation. It's a big deal for you, and missing out on that's big. But I want to call out a couple guys that he mentioned. He said that they were doing these competitions, and he's kind of saw a few of the videos come out from the UGA film department, and they do the little hype videos and things. I saw that sometimes you see these guys going one-on-one, whether it be, guys pulling a tire, trying to pull it away from each other, or, competing one-on-one. And he said that James Cook maybe had one of the highest win percentages in these one-on-one battles, and he and Zamir White are going head-to-head a lot. I'm like, ooh, that's interesting, and you guys did a great breakdown on the site at UGASports.com, which, by the way, you can get until July 1st for free if you use promo code UGA Free 2020. UGA Free 2020. You can go get UGA Sports, everything, the dog event, all the stories, free until July 1st. If you cancel right before July 1st, I'm not going to be mad at you. I just want you to have something to read while you're stuck at home. Dane, you and Ben Rollins are doing a great series where you look at the 21 players that have a Pro Football Focus grade of 70 or higher. One of the first guys you guys did with James Cook. We see James Cook as, Kirby Smart saying, look, this is a guy a lot of people thought was going to transfer, before the season was over. Or thought, after the season, they're like, oh, this guy's transferring. He didn't get enough carries. He's going to be gone. But apparently he's out there winning these one-on-one battles, competing really hard. And Kirby's like, yeah, that's the guy doing it. So check out that video. He also said that Clay Webb was making some strides. I think that's big because Georgia definitely needs him at guard. And my boy Justin Schaefer, who's for an entire season we saw him in the neck brace. Not the entire season, but for a long time. And he kept saying, look, I'm coming back. I'm coming back. And you see him in that neck brace, you're like, this kid's never going to play football again. But Kirby's like, no, he's out there doing stuff. So do not mark off, don't write off Justin Schaefer. Again, you got to replace his offensive lineman. That's a guy that can do it. If Justin Schaefer and Clay Webb are healthy and they are competing at a high level, Jamari Sawyer doesn't have to move inside. So I just think there's some pretty nice comments there about some of the guys who were, to your point, were ready to take off in spring, ready to make a name for themselves, and couldn't. Am I wrong?
No, absolutely. But I will say this, on the same, kind of along the same lines, but to the other side of it, you needed to be able to have these spring practices to figure out, are some of these guys that we've recruited in the past ready to take that next step? And are they going to be able to contribute down the line? And if not, do we have to backfill that position with recruiting? You've got to wonder, our Tymon Mitchell, our Zion Logue, Bill Norton, are those guys making the progress that you're hoping to see? Or are suddenly you in the market for another nose or a big guy like Logue to get in there and replace that? I think that it's equally important on that front as well.
Well, and there's also like making sure that players don't get content where they think that their roster spot was. And I'm just using this guy as an example. I don't think anyone would accuse him of being lackadaisical or not working hard. But if Nolan Smith went into this time period and was like, you know what, I'm just going to chill and lay back, his spot would be taken from him when they get back on the field. Now, I don't think that's going to happen because he's like one of the first ones that we see working out, and he's crazy in doing that. But if anyone thinks that they can just chill through this stretch and then walk on a practice field, whether it be summer or fall, and be ready to go. That's not the case. I mean, there's a lot of discipline that goes into being ready right now.
Well,
I also think we talk about this, how this is affecting the players, the coaches and guys who needed that spring to get their feet underneath them. And I think, Jake, you make a good point saying, Todd Monken he's been a coach. He's been a head coach. This is a guy who, it's not like he's installing foreign concepts with Jamie Newman, when he tells them, hey, I don't want to oversimplify what football is, but it's not like you try to teach him Dutch,
He's not going to try to Brian Schottenheimer it. I mean, I don't think he's going to try to pound a square peg into a round hole.
The coronavirus is bad enough. Don't bring up shot. I mean, let's not get crazy here. But no, you're right. It's not like, hey, let's change everything. Was it Schottenheimer or was it one of the different offensive coordinators who came in and decided that everybody needed to learn his play calls and his verbiage?
Yeah, that was Schottenheimer, I'm pretty sure.
So instead of having one guy learn what Georgia was already using, you had 45 guys learn what the coach was using. Yeah.
I mean, that was he was in essence Georgia's coronavirus before the coronavirus hit.
I mean, there was a time
UGASports does not endorse this opinion and is not held legally responsible for therein.
There was a time that fans were like really happy that Mike Bobo was on the way out and Schottenheimer was on the way in. That was only for like a month, but that time existed.
Be careful what you wish for.
Well, and I think you got to think of it too, though. Brian Schottenheimer was coming at it from being a longtime pro guy, pretty much a career pro guy, whereas Monken has the college experience and figuring out how do you work around this. You've only got a limited window. It's not a situation where Jamie Newman is your franchise quarterback for the next 3 years. You're not trying to get the verbiage down so you guys will be able to communicate. You've got to just be able to roll with what you got. And I think that Monken has a distinct advantage there because of that college background.
You're right, he does. And I'm just saying for him, I agree with you. I don't know that and he's, we had the story yesterday, the day before, that now the coaches have 2 hours a week where they can do the video instruction, if you will. They can show film and stuff like that. They can't tell the kids to work out, which I don't understand that aspect.
I want to see a show of hands of how many people believe that every school adheres to 2 hours a week.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Kirby Smart in the press conference said we can call them all we want.
Right.
I'm like, okay.
Call them.
But they're allowed to do the 2 hours of video calls. And the other, I mean, it was because if you can call a kid directly and just check on them, that's allowed. They can do that all they want. But if you actually want to call and have meetings and instruction, review film, like Dane right now, if need be, he could actually call up videos and we could share them in this and we could discuss it. So Todd Monken will be able to call that up, have Jamie on the phone, have Dwan Mathis, Stetson Bennett, all his quarterbacks in little windows and show them plays. Hey, this is what we're going to run. This is what I ran in Tampa Bay. This is what I ran in Cleveland. Here's what I ran at Southern Miss. He can do all that. So again, I think he'll be fine. But the guy who needed the coach who needed this spring, in my opinion, is Scott Cochran. This is a guy, he's going to come over, take over Georgia special teams. And Kirby was asked about Scott Cochran. I think it's the first time he's really commented on him. And, everyone loves to get into the, Kirby stole Scott Cochran away from Alabama. It's kind of a big F you to Nick Saban. I'm like, no, you don't understand. That's Kirby's best friend. One of his best friends. They're very tight. And Kirby wanted him from the beginning. But I thought that Kirby's comments about one area, because people said, why did you hire him as a special teams coordinator? And he pointed out that even going back to LSU, Scott Cochran and at Alabama has always been around special teams. He understands special teams. And he named like 6 coaches on Georgia's squad now that have special teams experience. And he said, look, I cover special teams. They're very important to me. So it's not like he's out there on an island trying to put together Georgia's kick coverage, punt team, kick return team. He's got, Dale McGee and Kirby and
Todd
Hartley, he's got all those guys. But to me, the most interesting news bite out of that was what Kirby said he looks for in a coach. And maybe he's said this for years and I just missed it. I'm not that bright, but I think this was very instructive is what Kirby looks for in a coach. He said, I look for two things. One, do the players want to play for him? And, a lot of people kind of that disappears, but like, no, he said, will these guys run through a brick wall for a coach? I'm like, oh, okay. That motivation, not, hey, here's a guy that comes in who's really, really intelligent, knows his football stuff. He's looking for motivators of men. He's looking for guys who, go back to like the Scott Eckler guy who would just, slam into his players.
Mike Eckler.
Yeah. Excuse me, Mike Eckler. Guys like that, just absolute crazy guys. Dell McGee. How many recruits have we spoken to that just they love Dell McGee? We spoke to Mason Smith. He could not stop talking about Trey Scott. These DBs when they talk about Coach Warren, they just live for these guys. Now, granted, a lot of players love their position coach. That's not unusual in what we do, but you could see that Kirby needs coaches who can make their kids believe in them. And I've been covering Georgia since 1993. I can tell you there are a lot of position coaches at Georgia whose players liked them, but either didn't respect them or did not have that take a bullet for them mentality. And I think that Kirby, that's one of the things he looks for. And Scott Cochran is that guy. He's a hell of a motivator. Kirby said the other thing he's looking for is who is a strong recruiter. So huge motivator, strong recruiter. And people think, well, he's a strength coach. If you don't know how important Scott Cochran was on the recruiting trail for Alabama, you haven't been following recruiting very long, because that guy is a master recruiter. I mean, motivation, he's off the charts. But when those kids come through and he says, look, here's what your body is, here's what I'm going to do with it in the weight room, here's how it's going to look when you get to the NFL, here's all the guys I did with your same body, here's where they got drafted. Those kids signed with Alabama.
Well, and I mentioned this a couple of weeks back on the show, but Scott Cochran probably met more kids than any single person on the Alabama staff. He probably hosted more recruits than anybody, because you always are touring those facilities. You're always bringing those kids in. You're not having your tight ends coach always interact with every linebacker that comes through the doors. You're not having Nick Saban get in and glad hand and take pictures with, the kickers. But Scott Cochran had every single one of those guys, in his room, and had the opportunity to sit down with them, or at least stand in front of them and present his message. And so, from that aspect of it, you've got to think the guy's pretty well qualified.
And a lot of those traits that I think accomplishes both of those goals of the motivation and the recruiting, that starts from such a young age, and some of that can be developed, but a lot of it's just personality. Anyone that covered Kirby Smart, the player, wasn't surprised when Kirby Smart became the coach and elite recruiter, right? I saw this at a small level with Dylan McGee when he was in Columbus at Carver High School. Everyone in the area knew him, and he knew every good player, not just the ones at Carver, but the ones at Harris County, the ones across the river in Phoenix City, Alabama. That was his life, and he made it that. And so college coaches saw that and was like, well, that's a guy that we can tap to pull on up. Gus Malzahn did it, brought him to Auburn as off-the-field analyst. He goes to Georgia Southern. He gets a spot as the running backs coach, and then the interim head coach. Kirby Smart gets hired at Georgia. There you go, 4 years, high school to UGA running back coach.
That's a good point. When he was in high school, I remember the kids that would rave about Dell McGee, when he's a high school coach. It made sense. When we first got our chance to ask the current players at Georgia about, Cortez Hankton, they rave about him, And that's not to say the Georgia players before didn't rave about, Tony Ball, they did, it's just, but
it's why the
hire
It's why the hire of Matt Luke was so impressive to me, because you lose a Sam Pittman, who everyone says this guy is just awesome and they want to play for him. And then you hear stuff of Boss Andrews saying, hey, if I wouldn't have gone to Georgia, it would have been because Matt Luke was taking me to Duke. And I'm like, if you're willing to pass up Georgia to go to Duke for this guy, there's something special about that. And the Ole Miss guys that were so pissed off when Luke got fired.
Yeah, I agree with it. It's the same when he hired Sam Pittman. You remember the Arkansas linemen and former players had this huge movement to keep him, try to keep him in Arkansas before he left to go to Georgia. So the point being, Kirby knows what he's getting in Scott Cochran. A lot of people think it was just a kind of a screw you move to Nick Saban. And I'm like, no, the guy fulfills Kirby's two most important criteria. And Kirby wasn't just saying that because, I mean, you could tell he wasn't thinking on the spot when he said it. He's like, this is, here are my two criteria, and can you motivate players? Yeah. And again, remember, he's always asking for leadership, so that's what he wants from his players. So he definitely wants it from his coaches. And can you recruit? Because Kirby's not going to hire a guy who's a mediocre recruiter. So I thought that was pretty strong.
From a time management standpoint, it makes a lot of sense that he would want to hire someone that he's worked with before, someone that he considers to be a friend for that spot, understanding that the offense is going to be so different and that maybe Kirby will be required to be involved in more of the offense than he has in the last couple of years even.
That's a good point.
And I think too with Scott Cochran, and coaches mentioned this a few times as well. You bring in a guy with those strong traits, strong motivator, strong recruiter. Scott Cochran ain't going to have to teach nobody how to kick. All right. When guys show up, they know how to kick. They know how to make a 50-yard field goal. All right. He's not going to show anybody how to do that. He's not going to show anybody how to corner kick a punt. Now, you'll talk about situations and obviously getting your formations right and figuring out, just the details of it. But the large parts of it are pretty much taken care of. I mean, when you go to practice, you see those guys up on the upper end and they're just pretty much standing up there by themselves, putting balls around.
Well, I'm sure when we leave, they do amazing things, and Kirby's out there with the protractors and the rulers and the velocity machines, testing all these angles and trajectories and all that stuff. I'm sure that all happens when we're not watching.
For players further down on the depth chart, though, if they want to make their name known, they do it on special teams first in a lot of cases. And so getting that relationship with Scott Cochran will be crucial in that sense to be a special teams gunner or to show that kind of effort. So then, Scott can go to Kirby and say, hey, this guy over here, he's been just working his ass off and he might have a little more time on defense.
It is the I don't even know exactly what you'd call it, but it's sort of like it's your first break into being able to make a real impact somewhere else. And so it's the next step up from scout team. Obviously it's a lot more important, but it's your opportunity to get on the field. And I think that Scott Cochran being able to, like you said, almost play a head coaching role and spot out guys and say, look, we're getting tremendous effort out of Jalen Kimber. He's a guy who's just burning down the field. He's striking everything in his path. He's leading these things. He's getting everybody out there. He's getting them lined up. Things like that, I think, fit Scott Cochran's personality quite well.
You're right. And I think that the motivator of Ben thing, well, Kirby stresses it nonstop. He talks about it. He's like, look, if we're going to have starters on there, he can point to all of his, guys are like all SEC, all Americans, all conference, all guys that, in your top 22 who either started out or can still play special teams, so it's not just a bunch of underclassmen, but your point, it is a great stepping stone. If you want to make that 70-man travel roster and you're not a 5-star, well, you go make noise there. Rion Davis going to make trouble over there. Makai Tongue, if he wants to get on the field,
See what you did there with making trouble over there.
Yeah, that's you get on there, you make a little noise, and
it's more competitive than it.
You get to dress out and go.
It's more competitive than it once was, though, because it used to be that's just where the effort guys went that weren't quite talented enough to play elsewhere. And Kirby changed that. Now, I'm sure other coaches did too, but at Georgia, Kirby's like, I'm putting my guys out there, whoever's going to make a play. If that means Sony Michel's going to be running out to tackle someone, I mean, that sounds crazy on its face, but it's going to be hard to get up that depth chart.
The first photo I have of Sony Michel making a play is him dropping a return guy at South Carolina. My first big photo of Sony Michel is him on a tackle. So it's not him breaking one, it's him making one.
And if you're Kirby Smart, if you're looking at okay, these guys are neck and neck when it comes to what they do on the field, but I can only take one. Who's your special teams contributor? That's the guy that ends up winning the battle. I mean, it's what ends up being the tiebreaker, I think, for a lot of those guys.
Well, you get to sell them, hey, look, you're Kirby Smart. He says, your special teams experience here, is going to help you in your career, which is going to help you get to the NFL, but also your NFL tape will include some special teams plays, because the NFL does the exact same thing. How many linemen do you see learn to long snap just to give them an edge in the draft? It's like, I didn't know how to do it before. I played guard my whole life, but I'm learning how to be a long snapper just so that, I can give myself one more box that's been checked when I go to the NFL draft.
If you're Tay Crowder, you're not Ray Lewis. I mean, that's the fact of the matter. But it's not to say that you can't have a productive NFL career. Especially in a role like that. And I'm not saying the guy can't play linebacker. I'm just saying it's the level of talent is certainly different, and the opportunity is still there for some guys to make a career out of that. They're great special teams guys that 10 12 years in the league.
Well, I mean, we know you hate Tay Crowder. It's okay. We understand.
I love Tay Crowder.
Speaking of hating, I hate that anybody that might miss this new special Athens forward. They have 0% APR financing for 84 months. How many years is that?
I went to journalism school, man. I don't know.
7? Yeah, I think that's 7
years.
This is what happens when you get a bunch of people who write for a living together.
Yeah, but I've been impressed. It's valid on select 2019 Ford models. It expires soon, so get out to Athens Ford. 0% APR financing for 84 months. That's impressive. And again, the folks out at Athens Ford, we've been dealing with them for years now. They do great work. I've told people over and over again how clean their service bay is. How nice it is actually to go out there and get your oil changed. You have these great big comfy chairs, nice couches. The drink station set up. You can get your coffee, you can get your Diet Coke, you get whatever you want. Great, super fast wireless. It's not the sketchy oil change place that's you wouldn't sit in that chair even if there weren't a coronavirus running around. So this is a great, clean place to get your work done. So folks at Athens Ford, take care of them because they take care of us, and we wouldn't have the show without them. So be sure to check them out. Again, that 84 months, 0% financing, man, you can buy a lot of car and get a great deal on that. So I highly recommend them. I was kind of looking to see where the newest Scott Sinclair video was. I've been looking for his daily videos where he explains to the Georgia players and anybody else who's following him how to work out at home. And, I think Georgia's not exactly walking a fine line because they can't prescribe to the players, here's what you're supposed to do today. Give me, 3 miles of running, give me this many sit-ups, this many push-ups, this much weight lifted. They can't do that. But I thought that Sinclair did a good job of explaining to guys, hey, if you don't have a gym at home, here's other stuff you can do. I thought that's been a pretty impressive thing.
I've been curious of what his spare bedrooms look like, though, because his garage is empty. I mean, that is his personal gym now. So I'm like, what's this dude doing?
I think these strength coaches get exiled out there by their family. You can't, they're not, you can only handle so much of that. So it's like, look, just Dad, go take over the garage, please, for the love of God. But I think it's been a very creative way for Georgia, and you just haven't seen it in a lot of other places. At least I haven't come across Twitter where strength coaches are sending these things out. Look, he's doing that from his personal account, and he's saying, hey, you're stuck at home, you can do these things. You can bet there's a little wink and a nod of like, hey, maybe if you're an offensive lineman, you do about 4 times as much of this as I'm mentioning. So, I think it's a good way to get the message out, be able to communicate with those guys without having the direct communication.
That's a good point. I also thought that it was neat that, when he says, hey, here's stuff you can do, and it's all non-traditional, he kind of built on their Throwdown Thursday line they've done for the past few years, where they're like, hey, we're not just going to do stuff in the weight room. We're going to chop down a literal tree, you know, we're going to, and they got out axes and went and cut down a tree. We're going to pull this thing around the UGA track. We're going to push the equipment van or the equipment semi, you know. They do all these sorts of weird things that they're physically, I don't say impossible, but just mind-blowingly complicated. He and his strength staff do it. And he's like, look, we're willing to do these crazy things on Thursday and, you know, just as a challenge to our players. And that's just carried right over into his, like you say, his garage where he's teaching guys to do all this stuff, different stuff with chairs and amazing different things you can lift around the house. And I just thought it was a natural outgrowth of that. And the reason I bring this up is, I was thinking about how many people think that Sinclair might, I don't want to say feel worried, but feel that Scott Cochran is going to come muscle in on his space. I'm like, no. Kirby Smart has exactly what he wants in Sinclair. He has a motivator of men, you know, and a hell of a recruiting ambassador. And there's no need for Scott Cochran to come over and do anything.
And Coach mentioned too, and I thought it was a great point. It was a few weeks back. He said, listen, Scott Sinclair would not be the guy I think he is if he didn't go to Scott Cochran and say, look, what do I need to, you know, is there anything, do you have advice? Do you have something that you could send my way? You know, there's going to be reciprocity. And I don't think that there's just not a lot of room for egos on this staff.
But at the same time, you know, when people think, oh, could this be a problem? That's a bit of a slight at Scott Cochran for just thinking that maybe he doesn't understand the role that he got hired to do. The dude's been part of like these great organizations for a long time. He understands how each role has to be defined in a certain way and the behavior has to go according to that role. Otherwise you get like pandemonium, and we see it with coaching staffs all the time. You don't see that with Scott Cochran. His players respect him. His bosses have respected him. So he's going to manage this new role just fine, I think.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fine. Speaking of the ambassadors, Kirby Smart was asked about having Todd Gurley nearby. You know, and Kirby said, hey, always been a great ambassador for Georgia football. Every time you see him, he's representing the G. And it's not just for running backs. It's for all the different position coaches. You know, all the different positions. They all like, you know, Todd Gurley. He's you know, he's not just going to try to bring tailbacks to UGA. He's going to try to make the entire program look good. And I agreed with that. I thought he does a good job. He was asked about a good story, you know, and he's like, well, you know, I wasn't there when he was, but I coached against him. And I thought it was a blessing every time he didn't touch the ball in that SEC championship game. And he ran over one of our linebackers and almost knocked him out. And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that.
Well, so yeah, you got to think Todd, having him close by, hey, makes it all the easier for him to swing by. And if you're Donovan Edwards, you're coming down from Michigan on a weekend visit, all of a sudden you look over, there's Todd Gurley standing there. That's not going to hurt your chances. I promise you that.
Yeah, you know, it wouldn't hurt. And again, Todd's bigger than his game. I know that sounds weird, but there's a kind of a celebrity status that Todd has that I think will carry over well. And I'm looking forward to it. As a Falcons fan, I'm thrilled to death. I know that Jake's probably happy.
I would have only been happier if it would have happened 5 years ago, as it should have in the first damn place.
No, hey, we got Big Beasley. That was so much better.
Yeah, where's Big Beasley? He's on the free agent market right now.
Speaking of free agents, Kirby was asked also about the guys who were not allowed to have a pro day. You know, and again, you know, how's that going to affect him? And he says he is getting calls and texts almost daily from, I think he said he heard from 5 NFL coaches very recently, NFL head coaches, about Georgia players. So it looks like the NFL draft is going to be very strong with Georgia players in it. So not a shock there. But so Kirby, I think without those guys coming to pro day and letting those guys work out in front of these scouts, you know, they're all going to the tape, and a lot of them guys who might have decided to turn on the tape and watch something, or, you know, try to get a feel for it, or it's questions they would have asked when they came to pro day. Now they're having to call Kirby. So
and I say you're seeing the flip of that in the high school recruiting ranks with these offers going out to kids that they haven't seen, but they've watched the tape on them, and they're relying on their coaching contacts at the high school levels to, you're going to get a feel for somebody if they're on campus, obviously, but what kind of kid is this? Is this kid worthy of an offer? I was on the radio this morning talking to somebody about that. And I think that's where the deep connections to high school ball really benefit a coaching staff in the NCAA right now, because you've got so many people that you can turn to and say, yes, this kid's good. This kid can play. A guy you can trust the evaluation of. I think it's a really interesting kind of carryover, not from the NFL to the high school recruiting.
I think it's a good point. Micah Morris, the Rivals 100 offensive lineman, just put out his top 5.
I bet Georgia made it.
They did, and we'll actually our guy Chad Simmons wrote out. He spoke to Micah, has a big story at UGASports, and all the other 5 that made it about Georgia. Says the big thing with Georgia is it being the home state school. I am in Georgia, so they are the Bulldogs that everyone talks about. I have visited Georgia 6 or 7 times, and I'm just so comfortable there. So that's what it came down with me in Georgia, including them in his top 5.
Well, and Matt Luke made him a priority.
6 or 7 times.
As soon as he was hired, Matt Luke got down to Camden County. I know you spoke to Micah at Rivals Camp Orlando, and he said, that one of the things that really stood out to him then about Georgia was the academic prowess. He said, I look at people from my high school that are trying to go to Georgia, and they're having a really hard time getting in. He said, so you can see the rigor that's involved academically at Georgia, and that's something that matters a lot to him. Dane, I got to tell you, that was scary as hell, man. You were like a big shadow, man, just moving in and out there. It was
terrifying. I thought it was smooth for the producer on the move.
I was good. I did want to bring up. I kind of got sidetracked because I saw the Micah Morris breaking news just then, but I was talking about coach, all these NFL coaches having to call Kirby Smart and ask him, hey, talk to me about this guy, talk to me about that guy, stuff that they probably would have asked when they come to Athens for the pro day, or the scouts would have asked. But Kirby says he expects to see 3 or 4 of guys who were not at the NFL Combine get drafted late, or at least sign free agent contracts. And he mentioned, Ledbetter doing it last year and some other guys. He says, look, it happens every year. And, again, we can all complain about the stuff that was canceled, stuff that didn't happen. I don't like to complain about it because, it's life and death, so and what are we being at? Again, I hate it that it hurts some guys' vocation. That's what I worry about. We'll see a lot of people, 3.3 million people laid off. That's life and death, but a kid not being able to move up on the depth chart in spring practice, it's not that big a deal. I do worry, though, about the guys who were looking for that chance to impress on pro day. The Tay Crowders that Jake hates so much, just kidding. Tyler Clark, Michael Barnett, Wolf, the tight end.
In some way, can't this, obviously they didn't get the pro day, but if you go back and look at the tape of Tay Crowder, there's a lot to like. There's a lot
Absolutely.
of plays on that tape. So in some ways, I don't know that it's necessarily a total disadvantage for a guy like that, because maybe Tay Crowder wasn't going to come out and run well. Maybe he didn't have the biggest vert or whatever. But if you are strictly relying on tape, and especially you're relying on what Kirby Smart has to say about a guy like Tay Crowder, who fought and clawed and scratched his way up the depth chart, then that could be an advantage in his favor, I think.
No, that's fair. I also think that some guys would. I think that Jake Fromm would have liked a chance to throw.
Sure.
I think that would have been good. And as you say, when it comes to recruiting, you're looking at a kid on film, you're basing him on his film, and you still have that question mark in your mind on some of these kids. Well, who's he playing against? Now with Tay Crowder, Michael Barnett, Tyler Clark, you're not worried about that. They're playing against the best. And that the system that Georgia puts a lot of players in the NFL, you're not worried about it. But being able to sit down with Tay Crowder for 15 minutes and talk to him and see how motivated he is, talking to Tyler Clark for a 30-minute sit down while you're in Athens, it makes a scout feel more comfortable to go, yeah, hey, get this kid, that Georgia kid. We got a pick in the 6th. We need a linebacker. It's between these 3 guys. Oh, one plays special teams. Oh, and when I talked to him, this kid's really motivated. Oh, and he played for Kirby. It just so I hate it for those guys. So I don't want to come across complaining about all the crap that's not going on. But the reason I bring it up is, we got Kirby's thoughts on it, and I don't want to say I felt reassured, but I think Kirby's right because again, he's having these conversations with coaches and scouts, and he says, "Hey, I think we got 3 to 4 guys who could be drafted late who are not at the NFL Combine," which is impressive considering 10 guys from Georgia went to the NFL Combine. So if you could get 2 or 3 more drafted in the late rounds, then that's a hell of a haul for Georgia. I mean, do we have any idea what the record number of guys drafted is?
No, we had Patrick broke down that combine number for us, and this was the second highest amount of combine ever. But I'm not sure in one class how many guys being taken would be a record. That's a historian. This is where we miss Dave. I love you, Dane, but this is Dave would just rattle that shit off.
I don't want to slight Tay Crowder though either. I know he's got the underdog story, and we talked to him on our Dog Days podcast a couple weeks ago. He was the 2-star tight end / running back / whatever that, in his 5th year, and I guess his 4th year as well, became a starter inside linebacker. He made a lot of plays. He's a really good football player. And so I think a lot of times when that conversation gets had and it's like, well, he didn't get invited to the combine, he might not get drafted. He's a good character guy. He's got the grit. I mean, look, dude's an athlete and he's a good player. So any team that will have the opportunity to kind of mold that for what they want.
Well, and you got – go ahead. No, I was going to say, you got to love a guy too. I think it benefits a guy like Tay Crowder who made such a big transition in his career to go from being, that running back tight end to flipping over to defense, a position he'd never played before. And then, as you said, becoming a 2-year starter, a guy who ended up contributing a lot, made a lot of big plays. Really something to be said for a guy like that.
I want to run through some of the comments from our the YouTube page. Hello to Jamil Major. I have to say hello to anybody named Jamil because I have a brother named Jamil. So, although Jamil spells his name wrong, sorry. Tony Jackson says hello. Scott Hare says, if they all have to quarantine, then quarantine the position groups together.
Oh God, could you imagine? No, you don't want that. You don't want Scott Cochran quarantined with Jake Camarda. That poor kid. he come out weighing 250 and 0% body fat. It looked like DK Metcalf when it's all done.
Yeah, but he put the ball out of the stadium. So. Scott Harris says, do most players head home or are they still in Athens? I know a lot of players room together. I've seen a mix. I mean, most of them went home, because they're on spring break and they weren't allowed to return to campus.
Yeah, dorms are closed. So unless you were living off campus, then you got.
But again, some of them do, and some of them are working out. When they do little videos, we mentioned last week, those kind of call out videos where they're talking to each other. You saw, who was it? Eric Stokes and Monty Rice and some other guys calling out each other. Some of those are like the high schools near their house. A couple of them look like they were like the stairs on campus, that are open, or the intramural field. So it's kind of a mix, but some are in Athens, most of them are at home though. Tony Jackson
says a bit of a hot take. If I may inject it, I've got a bit of a hot take here.
Go nuts.
I don't think that Jake Fromm regrets entering the NFL draft, but if there's any factor that would give him even the slightest amount of regret, it would be that during this time that would be spring practice, he could hunt and fish as much as he would want right now.
Rather than just out there grinding for trying to get some tape.
Has anybody seen Ben Cleveland?
I bet someone has, but I bet they've been draped in camouflage and hunting a turkey. So.
Scott Harris says, do we really see that stadium filled shoulder to shoulder during the next 8 months?
That's the question everybody's asking. Robbie?
Now, I did. You saw Kirk Herbstreit come out and say, hey, I don't think there's going to be they'll play a season next year, or that he's worried about it. That a lot of people just thought he was being a talking head, the tail wagging the dog because he works for ESPN. He says something like that. Then what does ESPN lead with? Hey, this is what our guy said. You're like, okay, so you need to make news and have something to report. But Kirk Herbstreit is one of the most connected guys in college football. I mean, top 5. He doesn't come out and he personally break a lot of news, but he knows everybody. So he's been great at working his contacts, so what he says carries a lot of weight. Now, I put something on at UGASports.com, which you can read about for free if you're a member at UGASports.com, which we have set up for you. You can be a member through July 1st. Just use code UGAFree2020. And you get on there. Why would you not be? Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's free until July 1st, so it gives you stuff to read. And, I mean, what was it? A couple of days ago, we had 11 stories, then we had 7 stories the day after that. We've got 4 going up right now, 5. Wait, no, we're going to have 8 stories today. So there's a ton of UGA sports stuff to read, so come check it out. But I put up a note because I spoke to someone who is talking to coaches in the SEC, and they are damn determined to play this season. Aside from the, what is it, $45 million payout they get from the SEC network. But I guarantee even if they have to play, if they get any sort of, I don't say all clear, but a staggered return over the coming months, there will be football played. Even if they have to truncate the season or start practices and, add a couple days onto the beginning of it. The real issue, though, the thought is that the season will be delayed. A lot of them saying, look, we don't expect the season to be obliterated. We don't expect it to be canceled, but we do expect it to be postponed. And one of them told me this, he brought up something that's quite interesting, said, look, we're having problems with our vendors. We have to get helmets reconditioned. We get shoulder pads. I didn't know you recondition shoulder pads, but you do. And some of that stuff was already slow from last year. So you have this huge carryover that the vendors aren't out there doing what they normally do because they're sheltering in place. So you have they said, look, even if you could get everyone healthy, let's say you let guys start practicing mid-July or something so that they can be healthy by the time the season rolls around, you're going to have a lot of vendor issues. So you could see a situation where they play a truncated season or a postponed season. I mean, I think people are really underestimating and maybe not even thinking about how important those summer workouts are, the spring practices and those fall practices to get things going, to condition these guys, to get them into shape where they can take the hits that you see them take, to make the cuts that you can see them make. The last thing you want is a reduced product and guys going out there and injuring themselves. That's just no good for anybody. My personal opinion, I think we will see some sort of football. I am hesitant to believe that there will be fans in the stands. Yeah, I can see that.
I think that Georgia fans do need to pay attention to the state of Virginia right now, though, because I did see that yesterday they extended their shelter in place through June 10th, which is the furthest that I've seen out. I mean, I think it's kind of understood that New York right now is going to be just for the foreseen future because it's a hotbed. But with that being the case, Georgia's first game against Virginia, even though it's in Atlanta, they're not going to show up without practicing until then. So keeping an eye on the state of Virginia might be something Georgia fans want to do.
That's a great point.
Be interesting to see. Maybe, I mean, you mentioned the idea of a shortened season and a bridge season. It would be interesting as hell to see nothing but a conference schedule played.
Yep. That was my thought too.
That would be very, very interesting to see. I think it'd be pretty fun too. But
what was that report about? Maybe a season starting in July. What was that about?
I don't know. That was the worst idea I've ever heard. Like in all of this, you might as well start playing now if you're going to start it in July.
Well, but what's the idea? I mean, I see no reason to move it up.
So what
I
read was that the idea was that the heat in the summer would be high enough to kill the virus, and it would prevent a stoppage in fall if there were a reoccurrence.
Okay.
I don't know. It's a terrible idea. You cannot have people. You cannot put 90,000 people. Yeah, that's what I said on Twitter. You're going to have more people dying in the stands of heat stroke than you are a coronavirus if you put people in Stanford Stadium in July.
That's a good point. Gurf Dog says, "Hey, Jake's virtual Zoom background is grandma's living room. Well done."
Hey, got my big macrame dream catcher back here too. So this is my girlfriend's office is where I am. So
yeah. Okay. Whatever you want to say there, Chief.
Good excuse.
Hey, RL Johnson, 1906 says, "Jake, can you discuss 2021 running back recruits and defensive tackle prospect Mason Smith?"
Yeah, for sure. We put up a story actually yesterday on the running back recruits kind of left. I know a lot of people are concerned because you saw two targets that have been mentioned consistently with Georgia off the board in Travion Henderson and Evan Pryor. I do think that Henderson was the bigger surprise for a lot of people, especially after Pryor went ahead and committed to Ohio State. But what have been telling people, the way I look at it, Georgia's number one target is still on the board, and that's Donovan Edwards. And I feel like they're in a good position with Donovan Edwards. I feel like they've got a good shot to close that one out. If I were projecting it today, I'd say they'd take him. And it's a situation like last year where you got Kendall Milton, and then, not to say Dacian Edwards is not a tremendous player and a big get for Georgia, but anything you got beyond Kendall Milton was going to be icing on the cake. You could take another player and know that you had one stud in the backfield. Donovan Edwards is that guy for 2021. I think that they feel confident in, building a system around him if need be. The big thing to overcome is going to be Michigan and pulling him out of the state and seeing how all that works. But I think Georgia is in as good of a position as you could hope, especially given all the circumstances around it.
Yeah, I think so.
And Mason Smith, that's a tough one, man. That's a really tough one. Georgia got really hamstrung by not being able to get him on campus. He's a guy who's never visited Georgia. So that's what's such a big deal. You don't have that opportunity for him to start getting that comfort level. Georgia was in a great position for him, I think, going into March. And I don't think that, with everything being so out of everyone's hands, I don't see it as a slight toward Georgia. But you got to think that if he's thinking about a school, if he's weighing where he feels comfortable, it's probably the school he's visited most. That school happens to be the in-state school. That's LSU. It's tough to pull guys out of Louisiana anyway, so it didn't help your chances with Mason Smith. But I do think Georgia will get an official visit and push to get him back on campus several times as soon as possible.
Robert Barnes says all SEC games would be awesome. I think a lot of people would probably go for that, not playing the out of conference schedule. Maybe you drop Virginia because their shelter place goes longer than the one in Georgia. And here's the thing, if you follow me on Facebook, I follow politics quite much. I don't put it on my Twitter feed. I tend to let's just football and jokes. But I did see someone made a good point. States will handle this differently. A lot of people want everyone to do the exact same thing. And I think that the policy you have for New York should be different than the one you have for Montana. It's completely, it makes sense to have different scenarios there. I can see a situation where what happens in Virginia and Atlanta, those could be more congruent, more similar than not.
But let me ask you this, though. With that being the case, no national policy, in terms of states, but do you see the opportunity or the need for maybe the NCAA to step in and put a uniform, uniform across college football?
Plus, what we're doing is each conference was doing their own thing. And then the NCAA, they're all trying to keep up with each other, and that plays into it. So I could definitely see the NCAA come in and say, look, everyone just do conference games or whatever. Would not shock me, but I just hesitate to say, because this school in a sparsely populated state, is back or doing something, then a school like Rutgers is going to be back too. You know, it's just you just don't see that happening. So I think you could see that situation. So to your point, yeah, it would not shock me at all to see a NCAA come in and say, look, we're not doing this or we're not doing that. But then the conferences might say, yeah, okay, you could say, just like when the NCAA came out and said, look, we're not having any spring championships. The SEC was like, well, we're still going to play baseball. We'll just have the SEC tournament, you know. So I think you're going to see some schools pushing it. And a lot of our comments were like, yeah, they're people are absolutely going to try to get them in there because of the money involved. Robert Bonds.
Well, and I think too, if you're the NCAA and you give maybe that pass to say, hey, do conference or something like that. And again, we're just spitballing here. We don't know anything about this, but it makes sense because it makes sense too, because of the regionality of college football. Your SEC teams are going to be, you know, in similar states of similar population size for the most part, and similar distribution of population, I think, as well. So you've got maybe a way to keep it a little bit more uniform across conferences as well.
And I'm not saying that he put football ahead of like health or public policy, but Brian Kemp's from Athens and he loves the Georgia Bulldogs. So if there's anything that he can do, Sanford Stadium's got some people in it.
Yeah.
Harkening back to one thing we talked about earlier, Dave points out 2002 and 2013 NFL draft, Georgia had 8 players taken.
See, there you go. So it could be a record. You know, it could be a record number of guys taken in this draft. Would not shock me at all.
I've got a couple questions over here on the board I wanted to hit real quick.
Hit them up.
Oconee Dog 7 wants some predictions. I'm going to skip 2 of his questions because I don't know right now. I'll just go ahead and admit that, but I will touch on these 2. He says, who do you think is better in 3 years, Barrett Carter or Smell Mondon? And that is a tough question because both of those guys, top 50 players, I mean, highly ranked guys in the state. I tend to lean toward Carter just because I feel like he's probably a little bit closer to what he's going to be. And I think that that's going to be advantageous for him. I think Mondon may have the elevated ceiling, but I think that he's a little bit more potential guy. He makes me think more of Quay Walker, whereas Barrett Carter makes me think more of Roquan Smith. And I think we've seen, you know, Roquan Smith able to come in and have an incredible impact. I think just the way the game's going, it benefits Barrett Carter a little bit. He says also, how much do you think Marlon Dean rises in the rankings by the end of things? That's going to be tough to project basically without spring practice, without camps, and then depending on what happens this fall. You know, I think he's a guy that has a chance to rise, certainly, but it's all going to be about what you're able to see out of him. And, you know, he plays at Elberton, which is a little seen school. I know Chad will get out there and see him. We'll get out there and see him. But, you know, he's a guy who a lot of, I think his ceiling is based on potential right now. So you want to see how he develops in that senior year.
I'm never worried about where guys fall in the rankings. Simply because once you've got them, you got them. You know, to me, it's interesting. You know, how good a guy did you get? But the guy moves up in the rankings. That's great. If he drops in the rankings, so what? You got it. He signed with you. Well, he's not signed. He's committed. But if he winds up signing with you, great. You know, because you could be ranked number 1. Doesn't get you a free rep. You know. That doesn't get you anything, you know. It doesn't get you a free first down. You know, all the 3 back-to-back recruiting titles for Georgia means zilch. Actually, what it means is you get 10 times the amount of criticism if you don't win a championship. So I'm sure Kirby's like, yeah, this is great. Now the expectation. I don't say all you hear is no excuses, you know, and you don't have one. So
pressure's a privilege, man.
GATA 2019 asks, has Kirby filled the on-campus recruiting coordinator's job yet, or is that part of Buster Faulkner's role with the Dogs? Buster is not part of recruiting. He is a graduate. I mean, he is a offensive analyst, and I don't think he hired a new on-campus recruiting coordinator, did he? I mean, he hired the.
I don't believe so. I think they're kind of tackling it almost like by committee, it seems, at this point, based on the hires they've made.
Yeah, I mentioned the guy that I can't think of his name right now. He was under Marshall Malchow, and he's been given a lot more responsibility. So
Was
he's
it
moved
Austin or Nealon?
I can't remember. I have to go back and look. We put it on the dog vet. A guy had tipped off that this guy was being moved up, and so I put it on the board and said, "Look, he's actually getting more responsibility, but I don't think he was actually named the new director of on-campus recruiting or anything like that." So it's the recruiting office is I won't say in flux, but a lot of the reporting that we did, it's with these guys not on campus, it's kind of tough to pigeonhole who's working where, So if you just go to UGASports.com for folks who are not members already, sign up for free, UGA free 2020. Click on anything that says Insider Note. We've done a ton of support staff updates, so be sure to check those out.
One more I wanted to hit here. Know It All Dog says, your thoughts on the two more recent 21 offers, opinion on what's up with that. I think he's probably referring to Landon King yesterday, picked up an offer, 3-star tight end out of Texas, and then a 3-star defensive back out of Virginia yesterday, picked up one as well, and that's Damon Harmon. I think that this, again, goes back to coaches sitting around and watching tape. I don't think it speaks to how they necessarily feel about their other targets, but this is, look, you're going to get with these guys plans A, B, C, D, E, and F. And now that they've got time on their hands, they're getting G and forward going. So they've got names lined up for these guys. I think these guys are benefiting, though, from the opportunity from having Charlton Warren and Todd Hartley sitting around and watching their film and having a chance to take that in. So, and if you look at both of their offer sheets, really, it's no surprise. Georgia was, you could even say, a little bit late coming in on both of those guys. Harmon's got a great sheet. King was already offered by Texas. South Carolina came in today. So he was just kind of a matter of time guy. I don't think it speaks anything negative to any current targets on the board.
I don't think that's fair. If speaking of being late, please don't be late when it comes to supporting our sponsors. When you get a chance, when Classic City Eats reopens after some of this dies down, check them out. Go check out Classic City Eats on Facebook. They're doing a GoFundMe for some of the people in town that need help. If you're an Athens resident or an Athens UGA alum, or hell, you just like to come in for games, please check out Classic City Eats on Facebook. We'd appreciate it. Check out Athens Forward. We told you the great deals they're having over there. 84 months, 0% financing for qualified buyers. You can't beat that. Plus, everything they have is a lifetime warranty on the powertrain. So, and if you need service and you don't want to get, you want to social distance, well, then Athens Ford can take care of you. Of course, our friend at Air and Overhead Doors, you're stuck at home, you're doing some home improvements, they will take care of you. The Air and Overhead Doors folks have the 10% off for any Georgia fan. Just let them know, Ryan Lucia and those guys will take care of it. Again, they are employees, they're not contractors. Ryan is going to be sure that his guys show up and do everything without leaving viruses all over your house. These guys are true professionals and they work at Air and Overhead Doors. So they're always doing training. So I know he has his guys trained up. So the folks at Air and Overhead Doors take care of you. That's AARON, Aaron, Air and Overhead Doors. We've mentioned there are 70 different locations of Europi, 70 Europi locations. All of them, to my knowledge, I don't know if any are closed, are doing the takeout. You go online, and the cool thing is, if you actually, like today, if you use the Europi app, you get points every time you buy a pizza from them. Today, it's like National Takeout Day. You get 3 times the amount of points. So you go in and you tell them, hey, I want pizza, I want this sauce, I want this cheese, I want extra cheese, and you just click. And the neat thing is you can click all the different toppings, and it doesn't make your bill go higher. So if you want meat lovers, you're not going to pay an extra $8 for it. So very cool. They don't charge you per topping. So check out any of your pies. Again, these are people in your local community that you can take care of, because you're not only taking care of that store owner, you're taking care of his employees. You're taking care of the woman that owns it. You're taking care of her, plus the people that she has who are the chefs and attendants. And so hit up your pie. And of course, Academia Brewing Company, check them out on Facebook as well, because they are doing tons of charity work. If you want to help your community, you can help out Academia Brewing Company in other words, if you were buying food from them or you were contributing to their charity thing, that your money is going to go 5 times as far because they're able to take your donations and with their abilities, because they have a full kitchen there, they're able to make your money go so much further through their good acts. So take care of our friends at Academic Brewing Company as well. I ask you that as a personal favor to me.
It's like a Jake
it would mean a
Roos
lot.
thing.
I'm sorry?
Beer and good causes. This is like designed for Jake Roos.
Hey, listen, when all this is over, I think we all need to get together at Classic City Eats and drink a few pints of academia. I think it will be well earned, and I look forward to getting back together with everybody. I'm
still missing that boho pork.
It's weird to me to even do this show without the scent of chicken around me.
I got
that's fair.
Stick. I just have the virtual part of this. Man? I didn't even get the good stuff.
Yeah, see, that's the only time we bring you in. So, hey, folks, that's all the time we have for this week. Be sure to tune in Friday when Dane will have a podcast with Coach Donnan. It's a great podcast. I listened to last week's. There was great. The stories about Will Witherspoon were fantastic. I think his comments on how this is affecting kids academically was very insightful. I mean, you remember it wasn't too long ago that we broke the news that all these guys were academically ineligible to play. Now all of a sudden, this is the semester where they get their crap together, and now they're having to do it remotely. Now, I didn't realize how that would work out. And all of a sudden, Coach Donnan comes in with the academic updates, which I thought was fantastic. I'm like, he's just ripping off what they can do. I'm like, no, that's great. So fantastic insight. Again, we can talk about this stuff, but when you actually get Kirby and Jim Donnan and actual coaches who live through it, who understand it, giving their commentary, that's what you want. So be sure to tune into the Dane and Donnan podcast. Excuse me, Donnan and Dane podcast this Friday. He'll have it for you. And our thanks and shout out to Coach Donnan for doing that. He doesn't have to. He's taking care of his wife, but I'm glad he makes time to speak to us. And with that, we will see you folks